Next on In Your Face TV, our exclusive one-on-one tell-all interview with the man the public knows as Simon Roper. We'll reveal which of the 16 children who claim him as their father is telling the truth, if any of them are, why Windsor snubbed him at the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations, and whether he really was the getaway driver for Luke Ranieri's notorious two-state bank robbery spree in the summer of 2019 that left 2 Louisiana cops dead and 5 others in a wheelchair. Stay tuned on In Your Face TV. All right, I had to get that out of my system.
I hear Ranieri's still on the loose.
Yeah, so I've heard. He fled to Italy.
Hearing you going along with that, like what's obviously a kind of invented persona, and then wheelchair, like all of a sudden.
Hey, you know, that it's not as weird as people make it out to be. I am still astonished that, like, if you know 3 things about me, somehow one of them is that I say wheel, right? Like, this has become such a characteristic thing, and it's not to me, you know, like, I don't think about it. Actually, it's funny because one of the biggest tells when I try to impersonate another accent is I forget to not do that.
Oh, okay. Like a shibboleth that shows you're actually Jackson.
Yeah, but then also I can never remember to counter my pen merger because I can barely hear the difference.
Yeah.
So, like, I always screw that up, and if I'm trying to impersonate something else. Ranieri is an amazing mimic.
Yes. Yeah, we were discussing this a little bit, the possibility of trying to imitate each other's accents, but I suspect he'd do a much better job of mine than I would do of his.
He's great at it. You know, I don't know what it is. Just a combination of a great ear for it and probably some just phonological knowledge. Like, he knows how to hit this formants in ways that can be harder for me, because there's even stuff, you know, if I speak modern Icelandic or modern Norwegian, like, I still have an accent, right? Like, I'm not perfectly hitting and people on YouTube are happy to remind me about that. I'm never perfectly hitting those formants on some of the weirder sounds, like voiced velar fricative. That's still a hard one for me.
Yeah, I particularly any kind of back fricative, I struggle to consistently distinguish, like, velar from uvula from, you know, that kind of thing. Like, people that, I've been told a lot of German speakers said, oh, you'd sound more have said to me, you sound more convincing if you tried a uvula trill. Why don't you try that if you're having trouble? And I can't tell the difference between a fricative and a trill there. Like, I don't know if I can even hear the difference, even though it seems like it should be obvious.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm doing an okay uvular trill if I try to say, like, a French word, membre, or something like that.
But it's convincing to me, but I realize I'm not a native speaker of a language with it, so
yeah. But then with something like French, I'm always going to screw up the nasal vowels, and
I never know how nasal is too nasal, because I think in theory I know how to do it proprioceptively, but there's a point where it becomes like and then that's clearly too far, and then there's too not far enough.
I'm one of those English speakers who can do it pretty well, like 2 times, but then in a actual continuing conversation, I'm eventually just going to say, like, N's and M's, and I know it sounds bad, but I can't. It's almost like you get that ball rolling down the hill, and I just can't stop it anymore.
You know? A lot of the time when in languages that have nasal vowels, I think sometimes there are actually allophonic N's and M's at the end, and sometimes there aren't. But in descriptions of those languages that are phonemic, they'll just put the nasal vowel and they won't tell you whether there's supposed to be an allophonic n or m at the end. So when I listen to them, I hear a n and I think, is that an actual allophonic n, or is it just me not being able to tell what a nasal vowel is? You know?
Well, and I think that's didn't you and Ranieri in your conversation talk a little bit about the R's word finally in like RP English, and because
Oh,
like phonemically there is an R there for speakers, right? Even if they're not saying anything like an R.
I would argue that there was. I think you could make an argument that there's not an R phoneme in coda, but there's a language or dialect wide rule that says you put a r in if there's a non-high vowel and then a vowel afterwards or something like that. But I don't know whether there's any way of neurologically working out which one's actually going on in there. I would say there's just an R in there and it doesn't get pronounced most of the time.
Right, but then comes out in liaison sometimes.
Yeah, if certain vowels a word final and they're followed by a vowel at the start of another word, it comes out. But speakers
Certain
can
vowels.
well, yeah. So I've done a talk with Jeff Lindsay just a couple of days ago, which I haven't released yet, who wrote this book, English After RP, which I happen to have next to him. And he describes this system quite well. So the vowels are, he's got a list of them somewhere. Basically, it's vowels that in American English, they would be obviously vowel r sequences. Where is it? There it is. So he lists the linking R vowels as the vowel in near, square, thought, palm, cure, and nurse. So if any of those come at the end of a word, so for example, the start vowel at the end of a word would be a word like star. So I'd say star without the rhotic, but then if I said, I don't know, I'm going to star in a video with Jackson Crawford, then the rhotic appears suddenly because star is followed by in.
I see. Oh, interesting. Well, and another thing that interested me there is that nurse is included, which I suppose in RP or RP adjacent dialects, nurse has a different vowel than the second syllable of like winter.
Yes, I would say it does. I think that yeah, so winter in my accent just has schwa at the end, which also does the linking R thing. But there's a kind of long schwa, which I think probably for me has the same quality as schwa, but it's just long rather than short. And that's in the nurse vowel. So like fur would be an example of that at the end of a word.
Okay.
Like an animal fur.
So you would even have that long schwa when it's on stress in a word like winter. So it'd be like winter, something like that.
Oh no, that's you're what you're saying is right. It's just normal schwa in that situation. So I think there's two phonemes that are quality wise, they're schwa, they're like central, but one of them is long and one's short. One is the nurse vowel and one is the winter vowel.
And you know, actually, while we're wandering down this phonological trail, it just occurred to me that I was thinking to myself, I was saying WINNER, but you heard me saying WINTER.
Oh, that's interesting.
You're actually anticipating a merger that a lot of American speakers have, right? Where intervocalic NT, the T drops. And I definitely often have that. For example, like SINNER and CENTER are homophones for me.
That's interesting.
They're both center, right? Now, if I'm trying to be extra clear, I'll say center.
Right.
But I would never like give you directions to go to the center of town. That's way too. Ranieri might. Ranieri has actually a very distinct set of dentals between his vowels. Like,
right.
You know, like I almost feel like he says water in a way that most American speakers don't.
Yeah, I've noticed that when he says Latin as well.
Yeah.
Latin. I can't do his accent, but
no, I can't either. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's some regional thing or just he's so used to speaking Italian, or if it's just something he decided to do. I'm not sure, but it's very distinctive to me about him.
Yeah, I think it's one of the first things that being a a Brit without a very good ear for the differences, the sort of granular differences between American accents. It was one of the first things I think that I noticed about his speech.
Yeah.
Would you say that? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to go off on a tangent. So
Tangents are fine because my tangent was probably worse.
I'm interested in what your tangent was.
Well, okay. I was going to say, you have often come to our family game nights.
It's true.
On Zoom. And it's funny to me how many of the attendees don't perceive their own accents.
Well, as in they don't consider themselves to have accents, kind of thing.
Right. Like, I think like have you've probably been there when Claire does her fake Southern accent.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Without realizing that she has a real one.
Oh, right. I see what you mean. Yeah.
Right. Like there's actual Southern features in her normal speech and she's totally oblivious to them. No offense, Claire. But then she puts on this super over characterized Dukes of Hazzard accent that sounds completely fake. And it's funny to me, like how much she doesn't even realize what she sounds like to someone who's not from Texas.
See, I think I wouldn't have known that accent sounded fake because I think that such is my. I know it's over the top, but I think I'm not good enough with American accents to know exactly what's wrong with it. Is it just that all the features are pushed to their absolute limit as far as being distinct from standard American English?
Yeah, and Texans actually sound pretty different from like Deep South, and that accent sounds more, Alabama to me, right? Like more that part of the country. Like you can actually tell a difference pretty well. If I can listen to a country music station almost always and call whether it's a completely faked accent, a real Texas accent, a real Deep South accent, a real Georgia accent, a real Carolina accent. Like I can usually call where someone's from.
Yeah.
But I know that that's also a lot of exposure and a lot of conscious thinking about it.
That's true. Yeah.
But even to a lot of people within that region, it's like, oh, Southern, right? And they don't think about the internal differences, which can be considerable. Like West Texas is super nasal, actually. And Travis, while we're talking about our game night crew, actually has a lot of West Texas features, but he spent a lot of his youth out there. Like he has the pull pool merger.
Okay. How does it come out? Does it come out more like pull or more like pool?
Pool. So it's like push pull.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Which he's never been aware of. But I think it's interesting that he has that and Claire and I don't. But I associate that really with West Texas, and he did spend a lot of time out there where I guess he picked it up, or maybe it's spreading east. I don't know. I'm not enough of an American dialectologist, but I take a strong curiosity in it.
Yeah, I think it's natural to. I'm surprised I haven't paid more attention to. I suppose it's at that point it's normal. It's normally kind of brain switches to social mode, and I don't know, listening out for that kind of thing disappears. And also over Zoom, sometimes because of the connection issues, it can be hard to.
Oh, sure.
You've got to kind of accommodate for those a little bit. Yeah.
Sure.
And also just lack of exposure to American accents, I think.
Well, I mean, I don't mean this to be entirely like navel gazing. Like, let me talk about me and my family's accents, but like I do think that there's some academic interest to sort of understanding these things consciously.
Yeah.
Have you been on when my cousin Kelly is on? Not Shelly, but Kelly.
I don't know if I have.
Because she's from Carolina,
right,
and sounds very different to me. Like who kind of consciously listens for it. But anyway, speaking of game nights, have you noticed what my default name is on Zoom?
Yeah, I saw. Well, should I say it?
I don't think it's necessary.
Oh, you can bleep it out.
Oh no, it's all right. Yeah, apparently that doesn't exist, so I'm going to keep that for now and until a real one exists.
I mean, I don't think having that as your Zoom name is in contravention of any copyright laws.
I don't think so. I could probably make my Zoom name Walt Disney Animation Studios.
Oh, I don't know. They're pretty hot on it, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
They're fine.
I have lived a fair amount of my life very conscious of Disney. I told you about my NDA that I signed when I was working on Frozen, right?
And you told me about all of the details of the stuff you weren't allowed to. Now, Jake. I think you mentioned that you weren't allowed to talk about certain things.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the thing is that thick to start with, but it even specifically said that not only could I not tell any human beings about the plot of the movie, but I also couldn't talk to any other intelligent life should they be discovered on another planet, in another dimension, by means of time travel, under the ocean, on the moon, in the clouds. There's this whole clause about that. Like,
that's incredible.
Yeah, maybe they know something I don't, but I mean, talk about covering your bases. Can you imagine? You know,
you broke out for a second.
Oh, sorry. But
oh, no,
can you imagine, you know, aliens land in the street and the first thing you think of is, let me tell you about this kid's movie in the snowman.
You want to ingratiate as many humans as possible. This is how you.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's true. Yeah. Let me tell you about a little song called Let It Go. But of course, every time that I so much as mention Disney, there's always this part of me that kind of looks for the red dot to start creeping up my chest, my head, you know.
Yeah. They seem to have such a monopoly on children's films as well, that people will sort of grow up knowing things about them and things, but obviously because you've grown up with their films, there's sort of some nostalgic thing in your head. They sort of.
It's not too nostalgic for me. I didn't watch.
Personally avoided it. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't watch a whole lot of that stuff. I don't know. I'm trying to remember what I did watch. A lot of dinosaur documentaries. You know, like if it had a dinosaur on it, I was going to watch that. By the way, speaking of Disney, I dug up this movie that they barely mention anymore from the 1970s, a Disney movie, live action Disney movie called The Island at the Top of the World. I think that's what it's called. Have you ever heard about this?
No, what is it?
It is pretty hilarious. So it's set in kind of the Gilded Age, Victorian era, right? And you have this big top hat British industrialist, and his son disappears in the Arctic, and the only clue about his whereabouts is like a rune stone somebody finds somewhere.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, so he recruits an American, I want to say he calls himself like Professor of Rune Studies, which I want that job, and a French like Zeppelin pilot who has a dog named Napoleon.
I like the detail.
And they take the airship to the North Pole, where there is an island of Vikings. And anyway, the son,
Viking culture.
It's interesting. Actually, one of the funniest things is they get involved in this sort of internal struggle between the Vikings, because there's one evil Viking.
Right. Okay.
And the actors portraying the Vikings are all from Scandinavia, from all over Scandinavia, but they apparently all agreed that they would speak like standard textbook Norwegian Nynorsk.
Right. Okay.
Except for the bad guy who speaks Swedish.
That's interesting.
So you get this kind of picture if you understand them speaking Scandinavian, and it's actually not
subtitled.
Yeah, thank you. Not subtitled. You there's this weird kind of like deeply embedded joke. And that's the guy. I think that most of the actors are Norwegian. In fact, I think the bad guy is, but like he decided to speak Swedish as the bad guy. Anyway,
Imagine if you were a Norwegian speaker and you grew up and you were a child and that was one of the early films that you really enjoyed. You'd end like you're bilingual English Norwegian and you just grew up despised, like being terrified of Swedish accent.
It would be hard to imagine being terrified of Swedish. Boy, I'm going to get some dislikes for saying that. Swedish has that buzzy, almost. Have you listened to a lot of Swedish?
I've listened to it, but not studied the phonology or anything. Unless it's just
in Stockholm and kind of spreading from Stockholm now, there is this high front vowel that it's hard for me to characterize as anything other than buzzy. So like we is v.
That's interesting.
It's not just v, right? Like you would hear in Sweden or Denmark, but v, right?
I have heard that, come to think of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to characterize it. Is it like pharyngealized or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, because it's not nasalized exactly.
No, it's not.
Right? It's not. But yeah, it's a really characteristic thing, and it's not all over Sweden, but it's definitely spreading. It's got some prestige attached to it, I guess, because I hear it. I feel like further and further from Stockholm and younger people. But there's this band from far northern Sweden called Movitz, who sing in their sort of approximating standard, but definitely northern accented Swedish. And it's always funny to me when they have like a guest featured singer on a track, because all of a sudden you get this.
I've never heard that whatever that process is in any other. Well, I come to think of it. Well, I mean, just before I said I hadn't heard it in Swedish, and I clearly think I have. So maybe I'm just not picking up on it very, very well. But yeah.
I don't know. I can't think of anywhere else that I've heard that.
Do you know if is it just that the phonetic quality of one vowel is just changing? Like there's an E vowel, and it's changing that way in all words that it exists in, or is it specific words that it seems to be?
It's everywhere.
Okay.
It is that phoneme is changing, but the other phonemes aren't getting, if it is pharyngalized, it's not happening to them. It's not like they say, ooh.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on with that, but it is gosh, it is hard for me to, I'm going to get a lot of hate from Swedes for this, but it's hard for me to imitate with a straight face, because in English it sounds so, I don't know, playful or something.
I know what you mean. Yeah. Like you couldn't imagine somebody using it in anger, kind of thing.
Yeah, it sounds like how you would change your vowels if you were, playing one of Santa's Little Helpers, right?
I think I know what you mean.
We make the toys for the kids. Right.
That was very, I don't think I could have done that.
Thank you.
Party trick.
What do you mean I sound strange?
I wonder if it's something to do with distinctive. This is one of those anecdotal things that there's absolutely no way to prove it. Not even anecdotal. It's like speculative things that there's no way to prove. But Swedish has a fair number of vowel phonemes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Relative to, yeah. What maybe it's something to do with acoustic distinctiveness, like because there are various ways that languages will try and preserve the distinctiveness of phonemes, and they're pushing and pulling influences, and they'll kind of avoid each other. And there seem to be natural processes to avoid vowel mergers, whatever, phoneme mergers in general. So maybe it's just if the acoustic quality of that is changed in an unusual way like that, then it becomes less likely to merge with something near it. I don't know. I assume that's not the actual reason, but it's a
worthwhile thought. I mean, could it be to have, because the phoneme that I would think it would be trying to avoid merger with or confusion with would be the Y.
Is that the rounded?
Yeah. Is that rounded high front? But that gets buzzy too.
Okay.
But it's not as common of a phoneme, so I don't think about it as being as characteristic, but that also has the kind of buzzy. So it's both the rounded and unrounded one. So it's not trying to keep those from merging.
Right.
But then
Is there,
Swedish and Norwegian both have a lot of high vowels,
right.
right? So you have the high back oo, which is actually written o. Then you have the kind of mid high rounded vowel, which is written u, and then you have the front rounded y and the front unrounded I. So
Is the
maybe
mid high, is that the one you'd write with a U with a cross through it in the IPA?
yeah, in IPA, but in Norwegian and Swedish, it's just written U. And I usually make it by positioning my mouth like I'm going to make an IPA E, and then saying a U, right?
Okay.
Ew is how I usually produce it. And apparently that gets my meaning across reasonably well. True.
Okay.
Ew.
Is it a diphthong?
No, it's not a diphthong, but that's just my excuse way of getting to it. In some dialects, it diphthong guys. But there's so many dialects of Swedish and Norwegian that you can say basically for any pronunciation that's a little bit off. This is kind of fun. You can always just be like, that's my dialect, because like any dialect, there's so many of them will have some feature, right? There's even dialects in Norwegian where eth survives, which is kind of cool.
I've heard this. That is cool.
Yeah, and it survives in a lot of Danish. There's nowhere on the continent that thorn survives, to my recollection, but there is some in I want to say it's in Nordfjord, Norway, is where they still have eth, or at least older people still have eth.
Does Faroese have the?
Faroese is very difficult to explain because it seems like every phoneme in Old Norse takes like 5 different paths depending on the condition of the environment.
Okay.
So sometimes in Faroese, an old thorn becomes H.
Right.
Which is kind of cool. So
cool.
I want to say that this from Old Norse Thessi, I want to say, and I'm sure I'm not going to say this quite right, but I think it's Hessi, something like that. But then but that's mostly unstressed words. If it's stressed, it typically becomes just T, like you would expect in the continent. And then eth, G, and J, and V, their outcomes merge and are dependent on the vowels around them.
That's very.
So
so they all just kind of smash into each other in different directions.
Yeah, but then come out differently on the other side depending on what vowels are next to them. So, and I can never do this particularly well, but for example, I think the name of the god Odin in modern Faroese emerges as Oven because it's preceded by an O and then followed by an I. I don't think that any of the outcomes are actually eth. I know that it sounds terrible that like this is pretty well within my wheelhouse and I sound so uncertain about it, but I just have never memorized the tables for how things, pop out in Faroese because it's very complicated. Listening to Faroese, it's if you know Norwegian or Icelandic, it's probably a little bit like if you know English and you're listening to Dutch. Right. And you're like,
sometimes there's something.
Yeah, sometimes something sounds so much like the same word in English, and it is. And then you get all these function words that are so weird, and it's like, what's going on with the G? And yeah, it's Faroese is a weird, fascinating little sister to all these other Scandinavian languages.
I only really know, the only thing I know about the phonology of it is the fact that r, or I don't know if it's labialized in Faroese, but that approximant exists in Faroese, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sounds pretty English language. I'll never forget, I might have told you about this, but I was at a flea market in Iceland one weekend, and there was this guy who was selling a bunch of old books, and they're all in Icelandic. And I find 4 or 5 books that I want, And I bring him up to the counter and I'm talking to the guy in Icelandic and he keeps responding to me in English. And eventually I'm kind of tired of it. And I said, well, I'm buying books written in Icelandic. I'm speaking to you in Icelandic. Like
What's giving? Oh,
yeah.
you have to. Yeah.
Yeah. He said, it's all right. Your Faroese, your accent will get better in time or something. Like the assumption that I was Faroese is pretty funny. And it might've been based on the R, or it might've just been based on the thought that like what other foreigner would even learn Icelandic.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it normal for Faroese people to learn Icelandic then? Or
I wouldn't, well, I don't know. Like if you can read Icelandic pretty well if you read Faroese and vice versa. Their orthographies are extremely similar. That actually is part of what makes Faroese superficially more difficult, is that the actual sounds that come out of your mouth are so
abstracted from the actual orthography.
Yeah, I mean, you could write an orthography of Faroese that would make it seem to make quote more sense, but it would look way more different from Icelandic or Old Norse.
Yeah.
But like Icelandic, they have a very archaizing orthography. I mean, when long before I had regular internet access and I first encountered written text in Faroese, I thought, oh, it's
it's just going to be pronounced like Icelandic kind of thing.
Like this is easy. But then, you actually start hearing it and it's like, all right. Yeah, this is like someone looking at Latin and reading French out of it.
It's funny because when I look at older Germanic languages, like I've got a book which I know exactly where it is upstairs, but it's got a green cover and a yellow bit around the edge, which is like a survey of a few old Germanic languages, like Old Low Franconian, Old English, Old Norse.
Is that Old English and its closest relatives?
Yes, it is. But that's a good ear for being able to tell. But yeah, but I sort of I really enjoy it. It's a good introduction, like a good kind of quick overview of the sound changes and vaguely how you should read things. But I look at the orthographies of all these languages, which presumably were, particularly the West Germanic ones, presumably were so similar to each other that I imagine impressionistically they probably sounded pretty similar. It probably wouldn't have taken much at all for a speaker of one to learn the other if they weren't just straight up mutually intelligible. And yet the orthographies are often very different from each other. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of the opposite case where
I think about this myself. If you were to plop down and let's say the early Viking Age, 800, something like that, and you speak Old English, I can't imagine that you would even necessarily think of Old Frisian and Old Saxon as different languages.
No.
It's such a common set of not only sound changes, but the morphology is very broadly similar and probably more similar than the orthography even suggests to us today, is my guess.
I think that's probably true.
But I think Old High German would be kind of tough because it's already undergone that second consonant shift.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, a lot of the difficulty for me, sometimes when I was learning German, I thought, would it be useful to learn correspondences? Would that help me at all? And there are a very small number of words where it did help. Like I was trying to think of the word for edge at one point, and I knew bridge was, or midge was Muka and bridge was Brück. So edge, Ecke, and that's like corner edge. So it's kind of worked in some cases, but otherwise, obviously, the consonant shift has kind of dragged things away so much that it's not immediately obvious at all whether two words are related to each other.
Have you noticed too that if you know Old English or Old Norse, that the gender of words in German can be really unpredictable, actually?
I hadn't paid much attention to that because I'm not fantastic at gender anyway. Like I'll mess up gender quite a lot in German, and in the instances that I'm trying to write Old English rather than reading it, I'll often get gender wrong. But I absolutely believe it.
It's interesting to me because like I think that for me, gender identifications of words are reinforced by modern Scandinavian, right?
Right.
So if I'm speaking Norwegian, I'm using the same three genders as in Old Norse, and every word is the same gender as it was in Old Norse. And the same with modern Icelandic. Like it's actually very consistent through North Germanic. And then Old English, typically it's the same gender. And then you go to German, it's like, why is book neuter? Right? Like it's feminine in all these other languages I know. So,
Yeah.
but then also I think would I guess I'd have to grab a book to check myself about this, but I think then book is bokes is masculine and Gothic. So Gothic is sometimes off a little bit. So there's something interesting going on there where like North Sea and North Germanic have typically the same grammatical genders for words. And then you go south in Old High German and Gothic, there's something different going on.
I wonder how much, because I know nowadays a lot of German words, the gender of a lot of German words is supposed to be kind of predictable based on certain features. Are 90% of the time this word is feminine, like having hin at the end is 90% of the times. I don't know if it's 90%, but like you can bet that it's feminine. And things like that, where you have to learn about 20 rules and it only gets you about half of the words anyway. So it's kind of almost not worth doing. But right. I wonder whether there was any kind of regularization where that rule kind of became established and people started adhering to it even for words that it didn't originally apply to or something like that.
That's possible.
No
or it's possible it went the other way, and that's what happened in the North Sea, North Germanic area.
Yeah.
I wonder, I have this whole thing in September of 2020, I recorded the latest iteration of my intro to the Indo-European languages video. And in it, I presented both a traditional 3-branching Germanic language subfamily, but I also presented what I call my starburst, where Old English is positioned on the starburst between Old Norse and Old Frisian, and then Old Norse is kind of over here closer to Gothic, and then you have Old High German and Old Low Franconian and Old Saxon coming back to Old Frisian. So it's kind of a circle radiating out from a center. And I sometimes think that's actually a better way of looking at it, because I don't know, like, I don't know that in, say, 800, if I were a speaker of Old English, I would have an easier time with Old High German than with Old Norse. I think it would probably be the opposite.
Yeah, potentially. What, because of the consonant shift? Or
I think the consonant shift is a big deal. And, even if the morphological markers are not going to be the same all the time, the morphological markers, I think, have a more one-to-one relationship.
Yeah. I think that's something I noticed while we were going through last year researching for this conversation video, because I thought you could probably get the morphological the endings and things pretty well. Learning the correspondence wouldn't be too hard if you put even a little amount of effort into it.
Yeah, because English speakers do this easily with Romance languages, which typically have pretty simplified rules for plurals, for example. But then German, like, if I haven't learned it from reading it a lot, I'm not necessarily going to know what the plural of a word is, and I'm going to guess. It's I'm going to say D and then say it with maybe umlaut, and just sort of let that float out there and see if that makes sense to anybody. German is rough that way.
It is. I get the sense that there probably is a pattern, and you probably do pick it up eventually, because I think I'm getting to the point that I'm starting to be able to predict what the plural of words. This is coming from, I learned German in school, didn't pay any attention at all, ended up knowing a load of words without their article, and have had to try and learn all the morphological stuff about 8 years after, or 10 years after learning the actual words, which is a really horrible way of doing it. Yeah. So it may be that I've kind of osmosised some of that when I wasn't paying as much attention to it, but yeah.
Hold on, the wind is literally blowing my door open. There.
Is that rug thing on the wall behind the, I can't tell where you are.
Oh, the rug is on this other wall right here.
I see, okay.
But this is a better place to sit during the day because I have the window right there. So I'm not, the whisper in darkness. Yeah, the rug that torments Shelley so much.
I like it as a backdrop. I'm going to stick by my enjoyment of the rug.
Oh, well, I'll bring it back. I mean, I can't put it right behind me right here.
Oh, no, I'm not suggesting you put it behind you now. But.
I'll just like wrap it around myself. But it's, it was from Shelley's mom. Is her questions about it.
Oh, I understand her own personal gripes or questions about it. But
we got to get you back on game night.
Yes, yeah. It's difficult at the moment because I've got this new job which sometimes has very early starts, but I will work out a way of coming to game night because I simply refuse to not come to it for the duration of the time I have this job. So yeah, but I was going to ask the "wh" thing. Do you think that is underlyingly a "h" phoneme and then a "w" phoneme, or do you think there's a separate "w" phoneme that you have, like a voiceless "w" kind of thing? Or is this not something you thought about? This may be a left field question.
No, I've thought about it some. I think if you listen to people who do it naturally, it's further forward. The whole phoneme is produced further forward in the mouth than people who are faking it.
Right. Okay.
So I think if you listen to speakers who have it from childhood, they say what, where, when. But if you listen to people who are trying to imitate it or trying, for whatever reason, to adopt it in their speech as adults, they're more likely to almost feelerize it, and you get like what, where,
what, yeah,
when. And that sounds, maybe there's people who naturally do it that way, I don't know. But I don't feel like that's the way that childhood acquired speakers typically do it. But maybe there are in other regions. To me, I always thought of it as HW. And it's pretty close to that, right? I mean, although when I make just an H, right, if I say ha ha, my lips aren't involved, but hua is all made at the lips.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I've paid a little bit more attention to it as I've been endlessly roasted on the internet about this. And I've noticed that my mom does it and my dad doesn't.
Okay.
But his parents did, and they're the ones that I surely was influenced by in doing it, although my mom might have had something to do with it. Neither of my siblings does it, and none of my cousins do it. So I'm the only person in this generation, but there are people in the generation right above me that do it.
What, like sort of, when you say above you, do you mean your parents' kind of generation?
Yeah, my mom.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I was wondering whether your siblings would do it, but I've never heard any of them do it.
No, they make fun of me for it. They have started making fun of me for it, but I also think they didn't notice it till pretty recently.
I was going to say, I feel like you wouldn't notice it if somebody you've known from childhood just was doing it constantly from when they acquired their native language.
But recently, Travis has started roasting me about it, and I don't remember him ever doing that before. So maybe he picked up noticing it from someone else, like maybe from Luke or someone. But I think that's kind of funny, and maybe he thinks of it as something sort of artificial because he didn't pick it up. But in a lot of respects, he and I sound pretty different. Like I said, he's got that merger that I don't have.
Yeah.
And I was so close to my grandparents in a way that he was kind of too young to be.
Right. Okay.
And then we moved around so much that, of course, he was mixed with different friend groups and all that. So
Are you the oldest? Your
Yeah.
sibling? Right.
But not of the cousins. But none of my older cousins do it.
Right.
So
maybe the reinforcement of your mum was probably the close relationship with grandparents is the real clincher, but I'm trying to think whether there's anything my grandfather does that he does this aggressive yes thing, which I think I picked up as a nervous tick. Yeah, I noticed myself doing it when I was sort of 10-ish, and then I've done it sporadically since then, but I don't do it in the same way he does. I do it as a nervous thing.
but that's still no doubt from him.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. You've mentioned that to me before. And of course, there is an ingressive yes in Icelandic.
That's true. Yeah, I think it's more common across linguistically than you would think.
I met speakers. There was a quite elderly lady in Eastern Iceland who I met, who actually would do like half of her conversations would be ingressive.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
She would speak, I suppose, aggressive, and then as she was catching her breath, she would just keep talking.
That is interesting.
Which
voicelessly or with voicing distinctions made?
Well,
oh, okay.
Actually, if you want to get into the super nitty gritty, Icelandic doesn't have voice stops.
Oh, they're aspirated, aren't they?
Yeah. So B is actually the unaspirated P. So I guess the voicing distinctions wouldn't matter as much in Icelandic as in some other languages. But yeah, she was pretty fascinating to listen to. I don't know if that was an individual tick or what. But I was a guest at her place for a few days and just amazed. Like she never had to stop for breath.
And you could understand when it was ingressive. You could understand what she was saying. Oh, okay.
I struggled.
I can imagine that making things quieter as well, because I feel like you can't talk very loudly and aggressively.
Yeah, it's hard to shout aggressively. Hey! It doesn't really work. You can almost shout a whisper, I guess, but shouting aggressively that's tough. Simon. Yeah,
I don't like trying to talk with voicing aggressively. I just think there's something horrible about it.
No, it's not easy. Yeah, that's tough. I don't know.
We're not supposed to do it.
No. Of course, Ronnie Area could probably give us the Emancipation Proclamation all aggressive.
Probably, yeah. Potentially.
I always call him Ronnie Area because I know so many Lukes.
Luke Gorton. There's another Luke that appears sometimes, isn't there, that I don't know as well.
Yeah, Anir. I just know too many Lukes. Actually, speaking of nasal gazing dialect differences, Luke Gordon pointed out something to me that I didn't even know about myself. He said that I have a glide in words like N-E-W, right? Old and new. And I think you do too. But he
is it the
yeah.
Or
yeah, new, right? But he pointed out to me that most American English speakers now don't have that glide.
No, they have new.
Yeah. And I had never even noticed that.
It's interesting that, is that something, because this is something I got when I did this, tried to do the progression of a certain American English dialect thing through, 5 different speakers through the ages kind of thing. One of the things I did at the end that I immediately noticed when I watched the video back that I'd done wrong was I pronounced new as in K-N-E-W with the glide.
But I say it that way.
That's how it is in my head. But it's good to hear that there are some speakers who do have the glide.
Yeah,
because it's not in British English, although there are younger speakers who are losing it.
Oh, really?
Here as well.
I had never even noticed it, and now I've been listening for it. My parents say it like I do. But then my siblings don't.
Okay.
So it looks like it just collapsed.
Yeah.
And people born, I don't know, starting the late 80s or something. But my parents still do it like I do it. So that really surprised me. Like, and it's something that I think American speakers learn as a distinction between American and British English, because in British English, sometimes you also get it so palatalized that it affricates,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Tune,
June. Yeah.
right? Because I say tune, right? I've got the glide, but I don't affricate. But then, I guess tune is the more normal American English. So that, you see people who make like a fakey British accent start turning T's into chuz.
I've seen this in memes
Yeah.
taking the British accents, like spelling it with TSCH.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
most aggressive way you could possibly show that Africa in writing. Like,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I think some
Tuesday in it.
It's very strange hearing you say in it, but yeah, I think some speakers probably pronounce it with the ch, but underlyingly it's probably still t, yeah. And if they were enunciating it, would be tune. But I think for me, it's like the phoneme at the start is just ch. It's the same phoneme as the start of cheese for me. I'm not even sure if there's a yeah after the affricate. Chew for me anyway.
Chew versus chew.
Yeah.
Right. Because to me, those are different. Because choo choo train is different from chew.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. I chew my food is different from a choo choo train.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you do have it different, or if you do have the glide after the cha.
True. Well, now I'm
thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the same thing happens in Portuguese or Brazilian Portuguese, right?
The affrication.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, but I wouldn't be surprised because it's just a assimilation, isn't it?
Because you hear, isn't in Brazilian Portuguese, isn't the preposition be pronounced chi?
I don't know, but I believe it.
I think so.
How do they normally is D normally just pronounced d like you'd expect, or
yeah? But I think before front vowels D and T have affricated to cha and cha.
Okay.
I think, from what I've heard in Brazilian Portuguese. So like night, I think is noite.
Okay.
Versus what you'd expect, looking at it be like noite. But yeah, it's funny to me because on the one hand, I'm someone who's so conscious of this stuff, and then the fact that these things can still surprise me. Like,
yeah,
I didn't even realize.
Like people pointing things out about my speech sometimes in an area that I hadn't thought about. Like somebody pointed out, this is something I talked about with Jeff Lindsay as well, but somebody pointed out to me probably two, within the pandemic, that sometimes I have really advanced goose fronting. I think somebody pointed out in a comment as well, like if I'm saying thank you to somebody, it'll sometimes be thank you. And if you actually go in on the vowel E, it's almost at the front rather than just like a lot of people in southeastern England have it sort of U with the cross through it, like at least that's where the start of the diphthong is, and then it ends with a glide, sort of back high glide. But yeah, and that's another thing. And I try and think to myself, is there some lexical diffusion thing happening where that fronted goose vowel is dropping into all the instances of the goose vowel across the words I use, or is it just in that specific situation?
Right, where
I can't tell.
Where it's almost the unstressed word and what's essentially its own morpheme. Thank you.
Well, that's true. Actually, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
Versus if you, I wonder how you say the vowel when you jump out from behind a pillar and shout boo.
Boo. Yeah, then it's barely back. Yeah, boo.
Yeah. Like I think that's probably where I would look for whether it's moving that way in everything. It seems like in most English language dialects, though, the U is moving forward.
Yeah, I know very few people. I can't think of anyone who's a native English speaker who would say ooh,
Hmm.
oos,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. Right.
Um,
You. Like maybe I would do it if I were really like trying to do like the, Simon Roper's tell all kind of
yeah, yeah,
voice, but it's not a normal conversational thing to do. And then in California, um, coastal California, it is way forward. It is a
very
IPA
forward. Yeah,
Y, you know, dude.
yeah. I've heard you use it as an example,
I
like the
do.
surfer dude.
Hey,
My
it
friend,
works.
it is a it's well, it's yeah, it's it's more helpful than a lot of pronunciation guides, which will just go, this is the sound that French people mean when they write you or something like that. And it's
Right.
like, that's not helpful if you don't know French or haven't spoken to many French people.
Yeah.
But it's helpful in learning, okay, different languages represent different sounds using the same letters, I suppose. At least it's helpful in that way.
There are still people
It's
who will never learn that.
yeah, well, I think it's just because when we're at least in the UK, when we're taught to spell and things, it's so drilled into our heads that sounds arise from letters and a certain letter makes a certain sound, where in reality, there's a much more abstract relationship where sounds are just part of a system in your brain and then letters are how you try and represent that. And yeah, but if you're taught that this letter makes the oo or the u sound, then the way you think about that relationship is it's I feel like that's pretty hard to break out of.
Were you taught to read that way, that kind of phonics system?
I wasn't taught the phonics system, that my dad's actually was my dad. I talked to my dad about it, but I don't know if he was actually taught using it. But I know the one you mean. I think we were just kind of taught these letters make these sounds, and then if we came across a word where that wasn't true, we just sort of got told, oh no, that's pronounced like this, and then we learned kind of by rote, sound by sound.
Hmm.
Were you taught using the phonics system?
I can't remember. I can't remember not being able to read.
I can't really remember not. I can remember missed, like for example, thinking that ice must be pronounced icky or something like that. But beyond that, I can't remember not at all being able to read.
Actually, um, that's one of my favorite pranks to pull is
Mm.
convincing people that words are pronounced differently than they are. Like, know, order the ceviche or
Let me work out what you order the ceviche. Is ceviche the key word here?
ceviche.
Service?
Ceviche, it's like a fish
Oh, okay.
dish. Actually, one of my favorites though was my aunt. Oh, I have all these dumb stories. I can never remember which ones I've told you, but I had an aunt who was really gullible,
Mm.
and I remember convincing her at the age of like 12 that, isn't it a shame that we're so lazy and we don't pronounce the T that's right there in words like nation and conversation? And
Right.
and she decided, oh, you're right. And so for the rest of her life, she would say nation and conversation and be really insistent about it. Um, she was she was an interesting person. She also thought that who was a shortening of whom, so she would only say whom.
Yeah, you have told me that.
Yeah, she had a bunch of interesting things like that. And then I tried to tell her, well, zoo is a shortening of zoological garden, so you really ought to always say zoological garden. But she didn't believe me about that one.
She didn't believe that's true, isn't it?
It is true, but she went with the nation and conversation.
The thing is, I'm not sure if that's ever been pronounced as a T in English. I think even
Huh.
in the 1600s, like phoneticians were describing, like maybe ASEAN, but never with a T.
Yeah,
But
I think from late 18th century poetry
mm,
from the US, I concluded that at the time it was something like Nacian.
That makes sense because
Yeah.
people like Webster, I think in his not in his dictionary, but in something he did in the late 1700s, described the sh, that like the palatalization that was happening for some speakers, and I think he described it. I'd have to look up a source for this, but I think he described it as like non-standard or kind of vulgar or something like that. So clearly, you were supposed to pronounce it with its full quality, whatever that means. So that, yeah, I absolutely believe that.
Well, and those judgments about substandard and such are so funny to me in a way, because people expect, and I know you have to run into this, they expect anyone with linguistic credentials to be fully on board with, stop the language change train. It's like, buddy, I study the train timetables. I'm not a conductor here, and you can't stop it. It's great.
Like somebody, I think I mentioned in one video, or hardly anybody says whom anymore, just as a throwaway thing, because I'd mentioned the whom distinction. And somebody commented something like, "What do you mean nobody says whom anymore? Soon English will be nothing but grunts and hoots." The idea that it's undergone all this change, but this is the critical point at which we have to preserve this exact stage of English, otherwise it will devolve into incomprehensibility.
Whom is the last finger in the dam, and when that is removed, it will just collapse on us, and we'll have to learn some other language because English will no longer serve. I'm actually very proud. That's the wrong word, but I made a point in all of my published books. I have actually never used the word whom.
Really?
Now, there's never a place where I use who, where whom would be prescribed, but I always work around it. Because it has always felt so superficial to me. I understand perfectly well where it's supposed to be used, but it feels, that is probably one of the two things that feels most artificial to me, with the second one that some people really still insist on being the I should versus you, he would thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. I should not have gone there instead of I would not have gone. It's not what should means to anybody anymore. But,
no, it's not. No.
But people still use it that way.
It's something that I hear a lot in television from the 1970s in Britain, but it's like maybe somebody in their 70s would say I shouldn't have thought so, or something like that, where I would say I wouldn't have thought so, but beyond that, I don't hear it much at all anymore here.
There are academic editors who still insist on it.
Really?
Yeah, I have actually seen that in the style manuals for some academic journals. So
that's interesting.
And to me, I mean, like, I'm a big history buff. I read a lot of, especially 19th century American history, and I'm used to educated writers from back then doing it.
Yeah.
Right. And being very consistent about it. But it feels so artificial now. And it feels artificial for them. Right. Like, I doubt they talked that way.
Right.
But, how do I know? I don't have a recording. But
I think a lot of things that seem artificial in old books I get the sense that they may actually have been used in normal speech, but I think you can sometimes tell, like have you ever heard anybody use should and shouldn't in that way in your lifetime, like in normal conversation?
No, the only exception being maybe that very fixed phrase, I shouldn't think so.
Yeah.
Right. That's almost so fixed as its own lexeme almost.
Yeah.
But never something like, I should have gone to Cheyenne, but the highway was frozen. Right.
Yeah. I've never heard that from a living speaker.
No, it would be confusing because it sounds like you're saying I must have.
Yeah. I ought to have gone to.
Well, I do that. See, I'm a big ought to guy.
Oh, yeah, I've heard. I think I do that sometimes.
Yeah, because to me it's clearer than should.
Yeah,
I think I think it's fairly a conscious thing. Like I grew up doing both, but like over time, I feel like I've become more of an Atu guy just for clarity,
Right.
or must, or have to, right? And there's another, if you there's another whole tangent, is I think half with a devoiced final consonant is a different lexeme from have.
I agree, and I have anecdotal evidence that, well, not even necessarily anecdotal evidence of that, but I talked to another friend about this. I had a lecturer who may or may not recognize himself in this if he ever watches this video, but who he did something very, very interesting. I don't know whether it contributed to it, but I think he was dyslexic, so he might not have known consistently what would be the standard way of writing this. But rather than saying without having to do something, he would say without having to do something.
Huh.
Rather than having, like hafting, without having to do something. So it was as if in have to, he'd analysed it not as have to, but as have to. I'm not sure. It was very, very interesting. I wonder how that worked, but
makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
To analyze it that way.
Particularly if you don't think of it as in terms of the written words, which is how people in the world don't think of things in terms of the written word.
Right, because I mean, you think about it by analogy with, wanna, want to, something like that. Huh? Yeah, I buy it.
So I realize I interrupted your musing about have to being a.
No, I've just noticed this. I mean, it's spelled the same way, H-A-V-E, but it's not the same word. And
No.
And you wouldn't pronounce it the same way. I have to go. No one says I have to go. But you also don't say like, I have a hat.
Yes. Oh, I see. Okay. So it's only in situations of, it's just that there's now a distinction between two lexemes, one which means I possess something and one which means I need to do something.
I think that's absolutely happened.
I like that analysis very much.
Yeah, and it's just the devoiced version that has the sense of obligation, but that's become a very big modal verb in English that I think actually doesn't get the attention that it deserves in teaching English.
So that people will end up treating it as identical to the word have.
Yeah, and I think that it doesn't get taught to second language speakers as being as major a part of the language as it is, right? They get taught something like I need or I must, and people say I have, right? That is the new shall. Right.
I wonder how long that's been, because presumably how it came about was the the assimilated to the voicelessness of the ter.
I think so, yeah.
Have to rather than have to. So I wonder at what point in that process it becomes its own lexeme. Like at what point does it stop just being a variant in rapid connected speech and it starts being its own lexeme? Because I agree with you that it is at this point, but which is not something I'd ever thought about before. But
I'm very convinced about it, and I'm trying to think if you could set up any minimal pairs, which it's actually hard because they occur in such different contexts. But I wonder if you could. All right, so I have to something, but then that verb has to also double as the plural of some noun, because then you could say I have to something.
Yes, I think the difficulty would be getting the stress the same.
Yeah, right. Because of course I have to usually just comes out as schwa.
I've come up with one, I think.
Okay.
If I said I have 2 apples, and you said you need 2 apples, and I responded I have to.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
And then the other one is
that's probably perfect. Is actually
Yeah.
is actually the like emphatic, I have to.
Yeah.
I have to. Yeah, I think that's perfect.
Yeah. Okay. I'm convinced then. That's
Huh. Well, now we need to go
draft up
through,
the paper.
yeah, we have to go through 3 months of you
Peer
know,
review.
yeah, human subjects approval before we can hand out a little questionnaire. And
Like I I had wondered, is it possible to do a little bit of published linguistics research? I mean, I know it is if you're just analyzing old texts and things, but is it possible to do that without an academic institution backing you? And if you're trying to use human subjects for anything, even if it's a questionnaire that is obviously to anyone doing it perfectly ethical.
yeah,
Nope.
I mean,
you know.
I for my dissertation,
Mm.
I did a questionnaire that I distributed to speakers of Icelandic, Faroese, and Norwegian, asking them for their judgments about what color things were.
Okay.
And I guess I hadn't ever had a class about this sort of thing, or just wasn't aware that you're supposed to get all kinds of red tape before you can send out questionnaires.
Yeah.
But it turned out that I couldn't just like publish my dissertation without going back and redoing that stuff with human research permissions, and just crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, what color is this? Like, what on earth? But
Did you go into all the, because I don't think I've read that. Was it in your PhD thesis?
yeah, it's there's an appendix dealing with how the color wheel, if you will, has been divided in modern Icelandic, Faroese, Norwegian.
Okay, I don't think I read the appendix. I think whenever I see an appendix, my head always, for some reason, my head always switches it to, this is just a list of figures kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Well,
so I often don't read them when they actually often have very interesting things in them. So I'm sorry I haven't read that, but I will.
I'm astonished you read any of my dissertation. like I wouldn't insist on it. But I think I was also trying to kind of hide it because of the human research thing.
What, just in case it got flagged up? Or?
I mean, you never know. I guess I'm more of a ask forgiveness rather than permission type usually.
Yeah, I mean, with something as bureaucratic as that, where it's obvious that like the speaker that you're asking, you don't even have to be at all deceptive about what the aims of the study are. Whereas like in something where you're trying to get vowel qualities or something, maybe you wouldn't quite want them to know before you did the study what you were trying to get at. But
right,
with you can just tell them, I'm trying to work out what color people think these things are.
Yeah.
What,
And honestly, it was next to useless, because living speakers of Icelandic, Faroese, Norwegian have categories that basically exactly correspond to English language categories.
Because of paint, I think because.
Yeah, that's my assumption. It's just, the worldwide distribution of the same industrial stuff and paint colors, so that people don't think, oh, in our language, we think of these as different categories. And now it's increasingly like, oh, this is our word for the objective category.
Yeah.
Right. That's a big thing with language over time, is or over modern times, is the way that taxonomy has taken over old categories.
Like a system of taxonomy that's not just semantic taxonomy in someone's head, like a kind of maintained system of taxonomy. I wonder to what extent that's this is something I think about in relation to the names of gods and stuff, like how Roman writers would consider, I suppose this isn't as much of a spectral thing, but how Roman writers would consider some Germanic god, if that's the right word, to be equivalent to a certain Roman god, because the categories were, obviously they were considered by the writer to be natural categories. Everybody knows who the gods are.
Right. Like when you read Tacitus and he says, the people of this grove have some ceremony dedicated to Hercules.
Yeah.
Like, well, who's
yeah.
Hercules? I don't know what you're talking
It'd be
about.
helpful if you'd use the. Well, I mean, I can see what they were doing because, I mean, I suppose in a world where rather than thinking about different people as having different gods, maybe it's just a kind of, oh, this is obviously the same person as we mean by. I don't, you probably have a more in-depth understanding of that relationship than I do, but
I don't know. I think it's something that we still do with different categories, though, right? I mean, for example, um, we look back on a 19th century writer who consistently calls whales fish, and we say, well, he was wrong. It's like,
yeah,
well,
that's true.
I think Herman frickin' Melville understood that a whale was warm-blooded and a mammal, but to
Fish
him,
had a different range of reference back then.
yeah, right. It's a swimming thing, right?
Yeah.
And there's a difference between communicating with widely understood semantic categories and performing science, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fish nowadays is not a scientific clade. If you take all the things that somebody will readily call a fish, like I think coelacanths and lobe-finned fish, which are obviously fish semantically, are I would have to look this up, but I think they're more closely related to mammals than they are to like other things which are obviously like fish.
We need to get you. We need to actually make this trip in summer happen.
Yeah, well, I think it's probably more likely now because I was planning on going to Berkeley in March, but I don't think that's happening now. So I'll probably have the time off and money to actually get over later. But what were you saying, sir?
Oh, 1 second. But I was just thinking we need to bring you to Wyoming, which is already part of the plan. But we got to go specifically to the museum in Thermopolis, Wyoming.
Right.
Right. So this is a town of about 5,000 people, lovely town, a lot of friends there. You would not expect it has one of the world's premier fossil museums.
Why that does sound like a very.
They have an Archaeopteryx. They have a real fossil, not a cast.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, what, from the local area or?
No. This, well, a lot of the fossils are from the local area, but it's
Right.
actually, it was made by private money, just this dinosaur obsessed family.
Right.
But the reason that you made me think about it is that it's not just dinosaurs. As you walk through this huge museum in a town of 5,000 people in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, if you got injured in this town, you would be flown all day to Denver or Salt Lake City. But anyway, you walk through and it tells you the story of life as you walk. So you start with, barely any fossil evidence of anything, and you spend a lot of time in each period. And there's a fascinating wing of this museum that's all about fish. Right. And all these weird directions that fish evolution took, and how what we call fish barely are even part of the fossil record before whatever period. There's other things in the sea that aren't exactly what we would call fish, but look like what we would call like it. Yeah, that stuff is complicated. And it's fascinating too to look at, as they start taking, as it were, steps toward land, where, like different types of fish have different numbers of digits.
Right. Okay.
So it's kind of random that land clades have 5 digits because there's like 8-digit ones that started out. And then, anyway, that stuff is fascinating to me.
It's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you can spend a whole day in that museum. And it is in the middle of nowhere, although it's a lovely town. Thermopolis is great. And then we can go meet my friends Merlin and Barb, who have a buffalo robe making business.
I like that as a niche.
They pay the bills.
I'm sure they do. Well, that's a niche is not necessarily a bad thing. A niche is a good thing.
Yeah, they make buffalo robes for most movies that need them. So if you ever saw The Hateful Eight, they made all the buffalo robes for that.
Really?
Yeah.
I have seen Hateful Eight.
Well, they made the buffalo robes, and they have celebrities who come by from time to time to get measured for a buffalo robe. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger came and got measured for a buffalo robe.
Is this for a film or for his own private enjoyment?
I think for his own private enjoyment. Wouldn't you like a buffalo robe, Simon?
I think I would.
It's a few $1,000s.
I was going to say that would be the whether I want it more than I want a few $1,000s. So,
That's actually where I got my cougar from.
oh, okay.
She was not hunted. She actually died in natural causes. But he's such an expert at processing wild animal hides that Game and Fish brings him animals that have died, and just to like make sure they weren't poached.
Right. Okay. Oh no, it's always good to have an excuse to talk. I am sorry that the games night can be so. It's just because of the timing. I will make a special effort to work out how it will work.
Well, I was especially sad that you missed the night that I hosted.
Sorry.
Because of course it is Claire Crawford's Games Night experience.
Oh, hang on. I think I came for an hour of the one you hosted. Because
Oh,
I remember when I came in, I think you were doing the bit about you're going to win a car or something like that.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, Luke Gordon won it. Claire has not paid yet for his brand new Ford F-150 Raptor.
So I assume you've paid up front for the car and given it to him as per your word, even if she hasn't.
It's still Claire's thing, right? And I'm going to do this even if I give up on YouTube one day and I hand it over to Stella or something, then it'll become Stella Nathaniel Presents Jackson Crawford's YouTube channel.
I like that idea.